beneficiaries who did not need it and did not ask for it. But that was George Bush's idea of what we should do with our children's future. And let me tell you something else. When George W. Bush sits there and says that somehow this is going to trickle down and all this is going to matter, well, something else happened with that money. The average chief executive officer, CEOs of American corporations today make 400 times what the average worker in their own company makes. 400 times. Never in the history of this nation has a discrepancy that has been so large, but it's fostered because people like George W. Bush allow it, they respect it, they don't penalize these guys for it, and we as Democrats have to stand up and say, we're not anti-corporation, America, we just want equity and fairness. And while the greedy robbed America, millions of Americans increasingly struggle to get by. Today there are 47 million Americans who have no health insurance. What an awful thought. What an awful thought. To sit around the table, to know that you're working full-time, your spouse is working, maybe you're holding 2 jobs, but you don't have health insurance. You have a sick kid. You can't work any harder. You can't make any more. You sit there and you watch the sick kid and you can't give him health insurance. What a helpless feeling as a parent. No parent should have to face that. In the United States of America, the greatest nation in the history of the world, we should not face it today. But it's not just the 47 million. An additional 45 million that we don't hear much about, 45 million Americans in addition to the 47 lack health insurance for significant portions of the year. That is 92 million Americans, a third of our population, either have no health insurance or they're in and out of insurance because of employment issues. And that, to me, is scandalous. And as Democrats, we have to stand up and reverse it and get into the 21st century to compete with the rest of the world. It's not just that healthcare is in a crisis. You look at where this nation is. You look at what made us great when we had compassion, when we held out and we invested in our people, when we tried to give people that helping hand of opportunity that Jack Kennedy talked about. But it's not just in that. In the pharmaceutical industry alone, in the last 2 years now has become the largest lobbying entity in the United States. It surpassed the oil and gas industry and it surpassed the defense industry. The pharmaceutical industry in the last cycle alone spent $128 million to lobby Congress. They weren't lobbying for you and I. What they were lobbying for was higher prices. What they were lobbying for was to make sure that the government didn't give us a pharmaceutical plan that allowed for the profits that these companies made to be controlled. But it was worse than that. The $128 million bought them $42 billion in tax breaks. So when the pharmaceutical industry tells you that they need all those record profits because they're investing in new drugs, that's a bunch of baloney. You paid for those. Your tax incentives paid for those. Don't buy the argument. It is not an accident. Of the 20 largest drug companies, 11 of them in the United States, the 9 that aren't, they buy their drugs. They buy their drugs. They want the industry. They understand the industry. We let the industry buy it. Those same companies that are fleecing you are giving the drugs away to Europe. It's wrong. It's not just the pharmaceutical industry. If you look at the lobbying industry in general under George W. Bush, in 2001, when he took office, there were 16,000 registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Today, there are 38,000 registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and they're not lobbying for you, and they're not lobbying for me, and they're not lobbying for the homeless, or the hungry, or the people that need education, or the people that need daycare or Head Start. They're not lobbying for them because they don't care. That's George Bush's America. If you look at the last big hog of the big three in the lobbying community, the oil and gas industry, look at what's happened in that. When George Bush took office, you want to know how much gasoline costs a gallon? $1.45. $4.07 today. The oil and gas industry in the last 7 years had a profit margin on an annual basis of 42%. While we are paying record prices at the pump, we also gave the oil and gas industry under George W. Bush, who had the plan written in Dick Cheney's office in the old executive office building in Washington, We gave the oil industry $47 billion in tax cuts in the last 6 years. They didn't need it. They didn't earn it. But we gave it. Because that's George Bush's will. The pain of the Bush years does not stop here. Today, the greatest nation on earth, the United States of America, has 37 million Americans that have fallen below the poverty line. 13%. It's shameful. It's wrong. But there's another 12%, about 35 million Americans, that are at 200% of poverty, teetering on the edge. 25% of the American citizenry is either in poverty or on the brink of poverty in the greatest nation on earth. Shame on George Bush. Shame on those guys for not caring for the people that can make this nation great. It is wrong, and as Democrats we have to change it. And while the people in poverty are teetering on the edge of poverty, what's happening to their wages? All 7 years of the Bush administration, wages have gone down. Does that mean the American worker is less productive? No, just the opposite. Productivity over the last 7 years has risen 16.9%. It means Americans are working harder, they're more productive, they're more efficient, they're just not getting paid for it. It's wrong, and as Democrats we have to demand that it be changed. And what happens when the American worker can't make enough money with one job? You know what they do? They go out and get another. Increasingly, that's what's happening. In the Midwest alone, we're now approaching 10% of all people that work hold multiple jobs. Shame on them. That's not family values if a parent can't be home because they're working 16 hours a day. They're not home with the kid. George Bush should know better. One of the greatest ugly consequences of the Bush administration, low wages, increasing amounts of workers' income going to health care, gasoline, home heating, wage suppression, is that hunger has come back in America. Studies last year suggest that 20% of Americans' kids go to bed hungry now. 20%. In the greatest nation on earth where we have the food basket that feeds the world. Shame on us. It is wrong. We are better than that. And we need to change it. And if you look at hunger in not just America, in America, 36% of all the kids or the individuals with poverty are children. And of these kids that go to bed hungry, it happens in the South and the Midwest more than any region. It's in our backyard. We have to address it. We need leaders who will address it. Finally, if you look at George W. Bush and his cronies that wanted, or it seemed intent at least, to destroy the economy, look at what they've done to the environment. In his first act as president, I don't know if you know this, I didn't, but I researched it.